Picture this. You're sitting alone at your college graduation, watching families around you burst with pride as their children walk across the stage. Your phone buzzes with updates from your parents about your sister's dance performance happening. 2 hours away. They chose her 4-minute routine over your 4-year journey. But what happened next completely changed how I see family, success, and my own worth forever. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica, and today I'm sharing a story that's probably going to hit close to home for a lot of you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to May 15th, 2022. I'm sitting in the third row of Northern California State University's outdoor amphitheater, clutching my graduation program with sweaty palms. The morning air still held that crisp coolness that makes you grateful for your cap and gown, but I barely noticed the perfect weather. I was too busy scanning the audience for faces I knew wouldn't be there. My name was printed right there in black and white. Jessica Marie Rodriguez, Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering, Magna Cum Laude. 4 years of 18 credit semesters, countless all-nighters in the lab, 3 published research papers on cardiac device innovation, and a provisional patent for a heart monitoring algorithm that could detect irregular rhythms. 12 hours before traditional methods. But my parents weren't looking for my name in that program. They were 2 hours south in Los Angeles, watching my sister Sophia perform a contemporary dance piece she'd learned 6 weeks earlier. You see, Sophia had made it to the semi-finals of the Pacific Coast Dance Championship, the same day as my graduation. When they told me they wouldn't be able to make it to my ceremony, my mom's exact words were, "Sweetheart, you know we're so proud of you, but Sophia's worked so hard for this opportunity. Your graduation is wonderful, but it's really just walking across a stage, right? You'll get your diploma either way." Just walking across a stage. 4 years of my life reduced to a ceremonial stroll. I remember staring at my phone that morning, reading the text updates they were sending me from Sophia's dressing room. Photos of her in her $75 costume, stretching at the bar, applying stage makeup with the precision of a Broadway performer. My dad had driven 3 hours to Los Angeles the night before just to make sure she had everything she needed. He'd packed the car with her costumes, backup shoes, emergency sewing kit, healthy snacks, and even a steamer for last-minute touch-ups. Meanwhile, I'd gotten ready for my graduation in my studio apartment that morning, alone. My cap kept sliding off because the bobby pins I'd bought from the dollar store weren't strong enough to hold it properly. My dress was the same black one I'd worn to job interviews, with a small tear near the hem that I'd tried to hide with clear nail polish. I'd printed my own directions to the ceremony because no one had offered to drive me. The contrast wasn't lost on me, sitting there surrounded by families who'd traveled from other states to watch their children graduate. The woman next to me was crying before the ceremony even started, clutching a bouquet of roses and taking photos of the empty stage. Her husband kept checking the battery on their video camera, making sure they wouldn't miss a second of their daughter's moment. That's when my phone buzzed again. Another update from my parents. Sophia just finished her warm-up routine. She looks absolutely stunning. The other dancers are so impressed. We can feel the energy in the theater. How's everything going there? I typed back a simple good and put my phone away. But here's the thing about being overlooked your entire life. You develop a different relationship with achievement. While other kids grew up expecting their parents to celebrate their victories, I learned to create my own validation system. That morning, before getting dressed for graduation, I'd stood in front of my bathroom mirror and practiced my acceptance speech. Not because I was scheduled to give one, but because I needed to hear someone acknowledge what I'd accomplished, even if that someone was just me. See? This pattern with Sophia wasn't new. It had been building for years, so gradually that I'd almost convinced myself it was normal. When we were in high school, Sophia decided she wanted to audition for the prestigious Valley Dance Academy. Within a week, my parents had rearranged their work schedules to drive her to tryouts, hired a private coach for technique refinement, and booked a professional photographer for headshots. The investment was immediate and enthusiastic. 6 months later, when I was accepted into the National Science Foundation's summer research program for high school students, a program that accepts less than 3% of applicants nationwide, my mom smiled politely and said, "That's wonderful, Jess. You've always been so good at figuring things out on your own." Good at figuring things out on my own. That phrase became the soundtrack of my teenage years. When Sophia needed $800 for a summer intensive workshop in New York, my dad transferred the money that same afternoon. When I needed $300 for lab equipment to complete my independent research project on insulin delivery systems, I was told that the family budget was stretched thin right now, and maybe I could find creative funding solutions. So I did. I tutored neighborhood kids in math and science, sold handmade jewelry at local craft fairs, and spent my weekends cleaning houses with my Aunt Maria. I figured it out on my own, just like they expected me to. The language around our achievements was always different too. Sophia was pursuing her passion and following her artistic calling. I was practical and academically inclined. When college application time came around, they spent hours helping Sophia write essays about her dedication to dance and her dreams of performing professionally. They hired a college consultant to help her navigate the application process for schools with strong dance programs. For my applications to engineering schools, I was handed a stack of brochures and told, "You're smart enough to handle this yourself." I wrote my essays alone at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed, researching scholarship opportunities and program requirements until my eyes burned from staring at the laptop screen. Even our report cards received different treatment. Sophia's B+ in AP English was celebrated with dinner at her favorite restaurant. My straight A's in advanced calculus, physics, and chemistry were acknowledged with a nod and a comment about how I'd always been naturally gifted with numbers. Naturally gifted. As if my achievements required no effort, no late night studying, no sacrifice. But perhaps the most telling difference was in how they talked about our futures. Sophia's career aspirations were treated with reverence and concern. Would she find the right opportunities? Would she be able to support herself doing what she loved? How could they help her navigate the competitive world of professional dance? My engineering ambitions were met with relief. "At least we don't have to worry about Jessica," they'd say to relatives. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'll be able to take care of herself. Engineers always find good jobs. The assumption was that Sophia needed protection and support, while I needed nothing but my own capabilities. This dynamic became even more pronounced once we started. College. Sophia chose a small liberal arts school in Oregon with an excellent dance program. My parents helped her move into the dorms, spending an entire weekend setting up her room, meeting her professors, and taking her shopping for everything she might possibly need. They stayed an extra day just to watch her first college dance class through the studio windows. I started at Northern California State on a partial academic scholarship I'd earned myself, in a pre-engineering program that would determine my admission to the competitive biomedical engineering track. My parents dropped me off on a Tuesday afternoon, helped me carry my boxes to my dorm room, and left after an hour because they had to get back for Sophia's rehearsal that evening. Throughout freshman year, Sophia called home 3 times a week. Long conversations about her classes, her new friends, the challenges of college-level dance training, her social life, her professors' feedback on her technique. My parents hung on every word, offering advice and emotional support for every minor setback. I called home once a week, usually on Sunday evenings when I had a break from studying. Our conversations followed a predictable pattern. They'd ask how school was going, I'd give them a brief update on my classes and grades, and then they'd shift the conversation to Sophia's latest news. How was her contemporary piece coming along? Had she heard back about auditions for the spring showcase? Was she eating enough? The difference in energy was unmistakable. When Sophia talked about her struggles with a difficult instructor or her nervousness about an upcoming performance, their voices filled with empathy and concern. When I mentioned the intense competition in my engineering program or the pressure of maintaining my GPA for scholarship renewal, I was reminded of my natural resilience and problem-solving abilities. By sophomore year, I'd stopped sharing most of my academic achievements with them. What was the point? When I made Dean's List for the third consecutive semester, I celebrated by buying myself ice cream from the campus convenience store. When I was selected for a prestigious research internship working on artificial heart valve technology, I called my roommate Madison instead of my parents. Madison understood. She was a pre-med student whose parents had immigrated from South Korea and placed enormous pressure on academic achievement. She recognized excellence when she saw it, and she knew how to celebrate victories that other people might not understand. We became each other's cheerleaders, studying together until late at night, sharing our achievements and disappointments with someone who actually cared about the details. It was Madison who first pointed out how differently my family treated my accomplishments compared to Sophia's. We were studying for organic chemistry finals when I casually mentioned that my research paper had been accepted for publication in the Journal of Biomedical Engineering Innovations. Wait, what? Madison dropped her highlighter and stared at. You got published as an undergraduate? Jessica, that's incredible. Did you call your parents? I shrugged. I sent them an email about it last week. And? My mom replied with a thumbs-up emoji and asked if I'd seen Sophia's Instagram post about her masterclass with some choreographer from a Netflix show. Madison was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know that's not normal, right?" My parents would probably frame that publication acceptance letter and hang it in their living room. That's when it really hit me. The way my family responded to my achievements wasn't just different from how they responded to Sophia's. It was fundamentally inadequate. I'd been so focused on proving my worth through academic excellence that I hadn't stopped to question why I needed to prove anything at all. But the most painful realization was still to come. That happened during junior year, when I finally understood that no amount of achievement would ever be enough to shift their attention in my direction. I had just received confirmation that my heart monitoring algorithm had been approved for provisional patent status. At 20 years old, I was about to become the youngest patent holder in my university's history. The technology had potential applications for preventing sudden cardiac events in at-risk patients. We're talking about something that could literally save lives. I was so excited that I broke my usual pattern and called home immediately, not waiting for our regular Sunday check-in. Mom, I have amazing news. Remember that algorithm I've been working on for early cardiac event detection? The patent office approved it for provisional status. I'm going to be the youngest patent holder in the school's history. Oh, honey, that's wonderful, she said, but her voice sounded distracted. Listen, can I call you back in a few minutes? Sophia just got home from an audition for a music video, and she's telling us all about it. This could be her big break. Sure, I said. Of course. She never called back. Later that evening, I saw my dad's Facebook post, a photo of Sophia in her audition outfit with the caption, "So proud of our talented daughter. She auditioned for a music video today and gave it everything she had. No matter what happens, we're amazed by her courage and artistry." My patent approval didn't make it to social media. That night, I sat in my dorm room staring at the official letter from the patent office. Madison found me there an hour later, still holding the paper, tears streaming down my face. "They don't care," I whispered. "No matter what I do, no matter how big the achievement is, they just don't care." Madison sat down next to me on my narrow dorm bed. "Their inability to see your worth doesn't diminish what you've accomplished," she said quietly. "You just invented something that could save people's lives. That matters, whether they acknowledge it or not. She was right, but it didn't make the pain any less sharp. I'd spent 3 years pouring myself into academic excellence, thinking that eventually my achievements would be so undeniable that my parents would have to notice. But I was beginning to understand that the problem wasn't the size of my accomplishments. The problem was that they'd already decided which daughter deserved their attention. That's when I started building my own support system. Professor Chen, who supervised my research, became a mentor who actually understood the significance of my work. She introduced me to other faculty members, helped me navigate conference presentations, and treated my ideas with the respect they deserved. She saw potential in me that extended beyond my academic performance. I joined professional organizations for women in engineering, where I met graduate students and working professionals who'd faced similar challenges. They taught me that seeking validation from people who couldn't provide it was a recipe for disappointment, but that didn't mean I had to accept being undervalued. I started documenting my achievements for myself, keeping a folder of acceptance letters, research publications, and positive feedback from professors. Not because I planned to show them to my parents, but because I needed tangible proof that my work mattered. By senior year, I'd learned to celebrate my victories with people who actually appreciated them. When I was accepted to graduate school, with full funding and a research assistantship, I shared the news with Professor Chen, Madison, and my engineering study group. Their excitement was genuine and infectious. We went out for dinner to celebrate, and for the first time in years, I felt truly seen and valued. My parents learned about my graduate school acceptance 3 weeks later, when I mentioned it casually during our Sunday phone call. "Oh, that's nice," my mom said. "More school, though. When do you think you'll be ready to start your real career?" Real career. As if becoming a biomedical engineer with a focus on cardiac device innovation wasn't a real career. That same week, Sophia got a part-time job teaching dance classes at a local studio, and my dad wrote a lengthy Facebook post about her launching her professional dance career and inspiring the next generation of artists. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was preparing to enter a PhD program that would position me to develop life-saving medical technology. But Sophia's weekend job teaching 8-year-olds how to chasse was treated as the more impressive career milestone. But here's what I'd learned by then. Their inability to recognize my achievements said nothing about my value and everything about their limitations. I'd stopped waiting for their approval because I'd found something better. Respect. From people who actually understood what I was building. So when graduation day arrived and I sat in that amphitheater alone, I wasn't bitter. I was disappointed, sure, but I wasn't surprised. This was simply the latest chapter in a story I'd been living for years. What I didn't know was that this particular chapter was about to end in a way that would change everything. Because sometimes, when you stop seeking validation from people who can't provide it, life has a way of delivering recognition from the people who matter most. The most devastating realization about my family came not through any single dramatic moment, but through the accumulation of 1,000 small interactions that revealed how fundamentally different their language was when they spoke about my achievements versus Sophia's dreams. It started with something as simple as dinner table conversations during winter break of my junior year. I had just received confirmation that my cardiac monitoring research would be featured as the cover story in the university's engineering journal, something that had never happened with undergraduate research before. The implications were huge. Medical device companies had already started reaching out about potential collaboration opportunities, and 2 professors from Stanford had contacted me about their graduate programs. I waited for the right moment to share the news, choosing a quiet Sunday evening when we were all together for my mom's homemade enchiladas. The conversation had been pleasant and relaxed, with Sophia sharing stories about her contemporary dance class and the new techniques she was learning. "I have some exciting news too," I said during a natural pause in the conversation. "My research paper is going to be the cover feature in the engineering journal next month." It's the first time they've ever highlighted undergraduate work like this. My dad looked up from his plate, chewing thoughtfully. That's great, mija. What exactly does that mean? I explained the significance, how the journal had a readership of 30,000 engineering professionals, how the research could lead to earlier detection of heart attacks, potentially saving thousands of lives annually. I mentioned the industry interest and the graduate school inquiries. Well, that sounds very technical, my mom said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm sure your professors are impressed. Then my dad's phone buzzed with a notification. His face immediately lit up as he read the message. Oh, Sophia, look at this. Your dance instructor posted that video of your lyrical piece on the studio's Instagram, and it already has over 200 likes. The energy in the room shifted immediately. Suddenly, everyone was leaning in, crowding around his phone to watch. A 30-second clip of Sophia performing a routine I'd seen her practice in our garage dozens of times. They watched it twice, commenting on her extension, her emotional expression, the beautiful lighting in the studio. You should share this on your own Instagram, my mom said excitedly. This kind of exposure could lead to more opportunities. 200 Instagram likes for a dance routine received more enthusiastic discussion than my potentially life-saving medical research being featured in a professional journal. That's when I truly understood that we were speaking entirely different languages. In their language, Sophia's artistic expression was meaningful, valuable, worth celebrating and amplifying. My scientific achievements were acknowledged politely, and then filed away as nice, but ultimately incomprehensible and therefore unworthy of deeper engagement. The pattern became impossible to ignore once I started paying attention to it. When Sophia called home upset because her dance instructor had given her constructive criticism about her port de bras, my parents spent 45 minutes on the phone offering emotional support, validation, and strategies for improvement. They understood that criticism in the arts could feel personal and devastating, even when it was meant to be helpful. When I called home frustrated because my research advisor had rejected my third proposal for expanding the cardiac monitoring algorithm, suggesting I needed to think more innovatively about real-world applications, my mom said, "Well, I'm sure. You'll figure it out. You're good at problem solving." No emotional support, no validation of how discouraging it felt to have months of work dismissed. No curiosity about what the feedback meant or how I planned to address it. Just confidence that I would handle it myself, because I always did. The most painful example came during spring break when both of us were home for the week. Sophia had been struggling with a particularly challenging piece for her upcoming recital, something that combined contemporary and ballet techniques in ways that pushed her outside her comfort zone. She spent hours each day in the garage studio, working through the movements, getting frustrated, trying again. My parents were incredibly attentive to her process. They brought her water and healthy snacks. They sat and watched her practice, offering encouragement when she got discouraged. They even drove her to extra lessons with a private instructor to help her master the more difficult sections. This piece is really stretching her abilities, my dad explained to me one evening. It's requiring her to grow as an artist in ways she never has before. We want to make sure she has all the support she needs. That same week, I was working on a presentation for the National Biomedical Engineering Conference, where I'd been selected as one of only 12 undergraduate students nationwide to present research. I was developing new slides, refining my methodology explanation, and practicing my delivery for what would be the most important academic presentation of my college career. I worked at the kitchen table, surrounded by research papers and laptop computers, often late into the night, when the house was quiet. My parents walked past me dozens of times, occasionally asking if I needed anything, but never sitting down to ask about my research or expressing interest in what I was preparing for. When I mentioned the conference during dinner one night, explaining that I'd be presenting to leading researchers and industry professionals, my mom nodded and said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You've always been so comfortable with presentations." comfortable with presentations, as if standing in front of some of the most respected minds in biomedical engineering and defending my research was equivalent to giving a book report in high school English class. The difference in their responses crystallized everything I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Sophia's artistic challenges were seen as meaningful struggles that required family support and understanding. My academic challenges were seen as routine hurdles that I would naturally overcome without assistance. When Sophia succeeded, it was because of her talent, dedication, and the loving support of her family. When I succeeded, it was because of my natural intelligence and self-sufficiency. When Sophia struggled, it was an opportunity for growth that deserved patience and encouragement. When I struggled, it was a temporary setback that I would resolve independently. The language difference extended to how they talked about us to other people, too. I started paying attention during family gatherings and social events, noticing the distinct ways they framed our respective pursuits when talking to relatives and friends. Sophia was our artist, or our dancer, described with pride and a hint of protective concern. Her challenges in the competitive dance world were discussed with the gravity typically reserved for serious life difficulties. People were expected to understand that pursuing a career in the arts required courage, sacrifice, and unwavering family support. I was our engineer, or our academic, described with a sort of relieved pride that suggested my success was both inevitable and uncomplicated. My challenges in the rigorous world of biomedical research were glossed over or mentioned only in passing, as if they were merely administrative details rather than intellectual and emotional trials. During my cousin Elena's wedding reception, I overheard my aunt asking my parents about how both daughters were doing in college. My mom launched into a detailed update about Sophia's recent performances, her growth as an artist, the challenges of balancing technique with emotional expression, and her dreams of eventually working with professional companies. When the conversation turned to me, my dad said, "Jessica's doing great. She's studying engineering and getting good grades. She'll be able to take care of herself, no problem." That was it. 4 years of intensive study, groundbreaking research, and academic achievements reduced to getting good grades and framed primarily in terms of my future financial security rather than my intellectual contributions or personal fulfillment. The most heartbreaking part was realizing that this wasn't malicious or intentional. My parents genuinely believed they were being supportive of both daughters. They saw Sophia's artistic pursuits as requiring emotional nurturing and validation, while they saw my academic achievements as evidence that I didn't need the same level of support. In their minds, they were giving each daughter what she needed. Sophia needed encouragement and protection because her chosen field was unpredictable and emotionally demanding. I needed independence and practical preparation because my chosen field was stable and intellectually straightforward. What they didn't understand was that intellectual challenges can be just as emotionally demanding as artistic ones, that academic achievements deserve celebration just as much as creative accomplishments, and that being naturally good at something doesn't mean you don't need support and recognition along the way. I realized that I'd been trying to communicate my achievements in a language they didn't speak, hoping that eventually the magnitude of my success would force them to learn. But they weren't going to learn. They'd already decided which daughters' accomplishments fit into their worldview and which ones they could safely ignore. Part 3. The Lonely Achievement. By the time senior year arrived, I had developed an entirely parallel system for acknowledging and celebrating my academic milestones. It wasn't born out of bitterness exactly, but out of necessity. I needed validation and recognition for my hard work, and since my family couldn't provide it, I had to create it myself. My apartment became a gallery of achievements that my parents had never seen. Above my desk, I'd hung a carefully curated display of certificates, acceptance letters, and printed emails that documented my academic journey. The display started, small during sophomore year with my first Dean's List certificate, which I'd had printed in color at the campus copy center and framed with glass from the dollar store. Over time, the collection grew more sophisticated. I added my undergraduate research publication acceptance, my patent provisional approval, my invitation to present at the National Biomedical Engineering Conference, my graduate school acceptance, with full funding and letters of recommendation from professors who understood the significance of my work. Each piece was carefully mounted and arranged, not because I planned to show them to anyone, but because I needed visual proof that my efforts mattered. On difficult days when I felt invisible or unimportant, I could look up from my textbooks and see concrete evidence of my accomplishments. The ritual of adding new achievements to my wall became deeply meaningful to me. When I received good news about my research or academic progress, I would first allow myself to feel the excitement. Privately, then I would carefully print and frame the relevant documentation. The physical act of hanging each new piece felt like giving myself the recognition that no one else was providing. My roommate Madison initially found the display a little sad, though she was too kind to say so directly. I could see it in her expression when she first noticed how meticulously I documented achievements that should have been family celebration moments. "It's beautiful," she said carefully, studying the arrangement. "You should be really proud of all this." "I am," I replied, and I meant it. But I also heard the unspoken question in her voice. "Why are you the only one celebrating these accomplishments?" The truth was that maintaining my achievement wall had become a form of self-care, a way of ensuring that my hard work wasn't lost or forgotten, even if my family wasn't paying attention. It represented my refusal to let their indifference diminish the value of what I was building. But the wall was just one part of my private celebration system. I also started creating my own reward structure for major milestones. When my cardiac monitoring algorithm received provisional patent approval, I used some of my tutoring money to buy myself a nice dinner at the Italian restaurant near campus, where I'd always wanted to eat but couldn't usually afford. I sat alone, at a table by the window, wearing my best dress, reading through the patent documentation while eating real pasta with actual fresh basil instead of the boxed mac and cheese that constituted most of my meals. The waiter probably thought I was a graduate student celebrating a thesis defense, and I didn't correct him. For 2 hours, I allowed myself to feel proud and accomplished and worthy of celebration. When I was accepted to present my research, at the national conference I bought myself flowers. Real flowers from the grocery store florist, not the wilted ones from the discount bin. I chose a bouquet of white roses and purple statice, arranged them in a mason jar I'd decorated with ribbon, and placed them on my desk next to my laptop. For 3 days, I had fresh flowers brightening my study space, a small luxury that felt wildly extravagant but also completely deserved. Every time I looked at them, I remembered that my research was good enough to be presented alongside graduate students and postdoctoral researchers from top universities across the country. These private celebrations became increasingly important as I realized that my academic achievements were accelerating beyond what most people, including my parents, could understand or appreciate. During the fall semester of senior year, I received an email that would have been front-page news in any family that valued academic excellence. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the leading researcher in cardiac device innovation at Johns Hopkins, had read my published paper and wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. She was inviting me to visit her lab during winter break and potentially join her research team as a graduate student. This was the academic equivalent of a famous director wanting to cast you in their next movie. Dr. Hernandez was a legend in biomedical engineering, someone whose textbooks I'd studied and whose research had influenced my own work from the beginning. Her lab had developed 3 of the most important cardiac devices currently in use, including the monitoring system that had inspired my own algorithm. I stared at her email for 20 minutes, reading and rereading every word to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding her invitation. Then I called Madison, who screamed so loudly that our neighbors probably thought someone was being attacked. "Jessica, this is incredible," she shouted. "Do you understand what this means? Dr. Hernandez doesn't just invite random undergraduates to visit her lab. This could change everything for your career. We spent an hour researching Dr. Hernandez's current projects and planning what I would need to prepare for the visit. Madison helped me draft my response email, and we celebrated with Thai takeout and the bottle of champagne she'd been saving for her MCAT scores. It was the kind of moment that should have been shared with family, the kind of news that deserved long phone calls and proud social media posts, and maybe even a special dinner to mark the occasion. Instead, I celebrated with my roommate in our tiny apartment, and it was perfect because Madison understood exactly how extraordinary this opportunity was. I didn't call my parents that night. I'd learned by then that sharing my biggest achievements with them only highlighted their inability to respond appropriately, and I didn't want their lukewarm reaction to diminish my excitement. I did mention the Hopkins opportunity during our regular Sunday call the following week, almost as an afterthought while updating them on my general progress toward graduation. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mom said. "Baltimore is lovely this time of year. You'll get to see some new places." Baltimore is lovely this time of year, as if I were going on a sightseeing trip rather than meeting with one of the most respected researchers in my field about potentially life-changing collaboration opportunities. "Will this visit interfere with your graduation timeline?" my dad asked. "We want to make sure you're staying on track to finish in May." They were worried about my graduation timeline, not excited about the incredible professional opportunity, not curious about Dr. Hernandez's research, not proud that their daughter had impressed a world-renowned scientist, just concerned that this achievement might somehow delay my completion of college, as if graduating on schedule were the only metric that mattered. That night, I added Dr. Hernandez's invitation email to my achievement wall, printing it on nice paper and framing it with extra care. Looking at it, I felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness. Pride because I'd worked hard enough to deserve this recognition from someone whose opinion actually mattered in my field. Sadness because the people who should have been most excited for me couldn't even pretend to understand what it meant. The visit to Johns Hopkins in January exceeded even my highest expectations. Dr. Hernandez's lab was like stepping into the future of cardiac care, filled with equipment I'd only read about and research projects that could revolutionize how we prevent and treat heart disease. She introduced me to her graduate students and postdocs as the undergraduate researcher whose algorithm caught my attention, and I felt like I was finally in a place where my work was valued appropriately. During my presentation of the cardiac monitoring research, Dr. Hernandez asked detailed questions that showed she'd studied my methodology carefully. Her feedback was specific and constructive, the kind of intellectual engagement I'd been craving throughout my college career. At the end of our meeting, she offered me a position in her lab starting the following fall, with full funding and the opportunity to expand my research into clinical applications. I accepted immediately. The flight home felt surreal. I was 21 years old, and I'd just been offered the chance to work with the leading expert in my field at one of the most prestigious research institutions in the country. My career trajectory had suddenly accelerated beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I first started college. I spent the entire flight drafting thank you emails and planning how I would prepare for the transition to graduate school. I was buzzing with excitement and possibility, imagining the research projects I could pursue and the impact my work might have on patient care. When I walked into my parents' house that evening, they were in the living room watching television with Sophia, who was home for winter break from her dance program. "How was Baltimore?" my mom asked during a commercial break. "Amazing," I said, setting down my suitcase. Dr. Hernandez offered me a position in her lab for graduate school, full funding, working on clinical applications of cardiac monitoring technology. "That's great, honey," my dad said, his attention already returning to the television screen. "Graduate school will be good for you." Sophia looked up from her phone. "Wait, you're doing more school? When are you going to get a real job?" "This is preparation for my real job," I explained. Working with Dr. Hernandez could lead to developing technology that saves lives. It's exactly what I've been working toward. Sounds intense, Sophia said, already looking back at her phone. I could never do all that studying. That was it. The biggest professional achievement of my life, an opportunity that would shape my entire career. And the conversation lasted less than 2 minutes before everyone returned to their previous activities. Later that evening, I called Madison from my childhood bedroom to process what had just happened. I don't understand them, I said quietly, trying not to wake anyone. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me academically, and they acted like I'd told them about a successful dentist appointment. Their reaction doesn't change what you've accomplished, Madison reminded me. Dr. Hernandez saw your potential. The Hopkins research team wants to work with you. That's what matters. She was right, but it still hurt. I'd spent so many years hoping that eventually my achievements would be so impressive that my parents would have no choice. But to pay attention, the Hopkins opportunity was exactly the kind of success that should have proven my worth to them. But instead, it revealed that no amount of achievement would ever be enough to change their fundamental disinterest in what I was building. That night, I updated my achievement wall with my Hopkins acceptance letter, positioning it at the center of the display. Looking at it, I felt a shift in my perspective. I was no longer maintaining this collection in the hope that someday my family would see it and understand what they'd missed. I was maintaining it because I deserved to see my accomplishments recognized, even if I had to be the one doing the recognizing. I was learning to be proud of myself without waiting for permission from anyone else. And that realization, more than any achievement on my wall, felt like the foundation of something important. Part 4. The dismissal and discovery. The breaking point came not through any dramatic confrontation, but through a moment of casual cruelty that revealed exactly how my family viewed my life's work. It happened during Easter dinner my senior year, when our extended family had gathered at my grandmother's house for her famous tamales, and the kind of sprawling celebration that filled every room with conversation and laughter. I loved these family gatherings because they reminded me of the warmth and connection that had shaped my childhood, before the subtle dynamics of favoritism had become so apparent. My grandmother had always treated Sophia and me with equal affection, asking about our studies and accomplishments with genuine interest, even if she didn't always understand the technical details of my research. The afternoon was unfolding beautifully. Sophia had just returned from a spring dance intensive in Chicago, full of stories about the professional instructors and the advanced techniques she'd learned. She demonstrated some of the new movements in my grandmother's living room, gracefully, navigating around the furniture while the family watched with appreciation. My cousins peppered her with questions about the competitive dance world, the other students in her program, and her plans for auditions after graduation. Sophia glowed under the attention, describing her dreams of eventually working with contemporary dance companies and maybe transitioning into choreography. When the conversation naturally shifted to include me, I mentioned that I'd just received confirmation about my graduate school plans at Johns Hopkins, working with Dr. Hernandez on cardiac device research that could potentially prevent thousands of heart attacks annually. My cousin Roberto, who worked in construction, asked thoughtful questions about how the technology worked and whether it might help his father, who'd had heart problems for years. I found myself explaining the basic principles of early cardiac event detection in terms he could understand, drawing diagrams on napkins to illustrate how the monitoring system could identify dangerous rhythm patterns. For a few minutes, I felt the same warm attention that Sophia had received, family members genuinely interested in learning about my work and understanding its potential impact. My grandmother squeezed my hand and said in Spanish that she was proud to have such a smart granddaughter who wanted to help sick people. That's when Sophia, who had been scrolling through her phone while I talked, looked up and laughed. Honestly, I don't know how Jessica does it, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of affectionate dismissal that made everything sound both loving and condescending. All those numbers and equations and sitting in front of computers all day. Where's the creativity? Where's the human connection? Several family members chuckled, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. But Sophia wasn't finished. I mean, it's great that someone wants to do the technical stuff, she continued, but I could never live such a boring life. Dance is about expressing the human soul, connecting with audiences, creating beauty in the world. Engineering is just solving problems, right? My cousin Elena nodded sympathetically. Well, someone has to do the practical jobs, I suppose. We need engineers and computer people to keep society running. Exactly, Sophia said, smiling at me as if she were being generous. Jessica's always been good at the mathy things. It's perfect for her personality. Very logical and systematic. Not artistic at all, but that's okay. We can't all be creative types. The room buzzed with gentle agreement, family members offering their own versions of the same sentiment. Jessica was the practical one, the responsible one, the one who would have a stable career and good benefits. Sophia was the artistic one, the creative one, the one who brought beauty and inspiration into the world. I sat there feeling like I'd been reduced to a stereotype, my research dismissed as mere problem-solving, and my career framed as a consolation prize for people who lacked artistic talent. The cardiac monitoring algorithm that could save lives was just technical stuff. The innovation that had impressed leading researchers was just mathy things. But what hurt most was the assumption that engineering and creativity were mutually exclusive, that my work lacked human connection because it involved equations rather than emotional expression. Nobody seemed to consider that designing technology to prevent heart attacks was one of the most profoundly human endeavors possible, or that innovative engineering required just as much creativity as any artistic pursuit. I wanted to explain that every algorithm I'd written was an act of imagination, that developing new approaches to cardiac monitoring required the same kind of innovative thinking that went into choreographing a dance. I wanted to describe the rush of creative discovery when a new solution emerged from months of analytical work, or the deep satisfaction of knowing that my research could help doctors save patients they might otherwise lose. Instead, I smiled, politely, and changed the subject, because I'd learned that defending the value of my work only made me sound defensive and proved their point about engineers being overly serious. Later that evening, when Sophia and I were helping clean up in the kitchen, she pulled me aside with an expression of genuine concern. "I hope I didn't hurt your feelings earlier," she said. "I think what you do is really important, obviously. I just meant that we're different types of people, you know? You're more analytical, and I'm more creative. There's nothing wrong with either approach." Her tone was so sincere that I almost believed she thought she was being supportive. But her words revealed exactly how she saw me, as someone whose analytical nature was a limitation rather than a strength, whose work was important in a utilitarian way, but not meaningful in any deeper sense. "I know you meant well," I said, because what else could I say? How do you explain to someone that they've just dismissed your life's passion as inherently less valuable than their own? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, feeling angry not just at Sophia but at myself for not speaking up. I'd allowed my family to categorize me as the non-creative daughter for so long that I'd almost started believing it myself. But lying in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling where I'd once hung glow-in-the-dark stars, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with biomedical engineering in the first place. It wasn't just about solving problems or working with numbers. It was about imagining a world where fewer people died from preventable medical events, then figuring out how to make that world real. Every successful algorithm was a small act of creation, bringing something new into existence that hadn't been there before. Every breakthrough in my research was the result of creative thinking, of looking at familiar problems from unexpected angles and discovering innovative solutions. The work I was doing with Dr. Hernandez wasn't just technical, it was visionary. We were trying to revolutionize how doctors detected cardiac events, potentially saving thousands of lives through early intervention. That wasn't boring or uncreative. That was world-changing. I thought about all the hours I'd spent in the lab, pursuing hunches and testing theories, failing and trying again, driven by the same kind of passionate dedication that motivated any artist. The only difference was that my medium was data instead of movement, algorithms instead of choreography. The next morning brought an email that crystallized everything I'd been feeling. Professor Chen forwarded me a message from a cardiologist at UCLA Medical Center who had read my published research and wanted to discuss implementing my monitoring protocol in their cardiac ICU. Dr. Sarah Kim explained that they'd been searching for exactly the kind of early detection system I'd developed, and she was excited about the potential for preventing cardiac events in high-risk patients. She wanted to set up a call to discuss the technical requirements and timeline for clinical testing. This was the moment I'd been working toward throughout my entire college career. The transition from theoretical research to real-world medical application. My algorithm wasn't just going to be published in academic journals anymore. It was going to be used to monitor actual patients and potentially save actual lives. I should have been ecstatic, but instead I felt a strange mixture of excitement and sadness. Excitement because my work was finally going to have the impact I'd always dreamed of. Sadness because I knew that my family would never understand what this meant or why it mattered. I found myself wondering what it would feel like to have parents who celebrated scientific breakthroughs the way mine celebrated artistic achievements. What would it be like to call home with news about clinical applications and hear genuine excitement in their voices? What would it feel like to have my innovations treated with the same respect and enthusiasm that Sophia's performances received? But I'd stopped waiting for that kind of recognition from them. Instead, I called Professor Chen, who screamed with excitement when I told her about Dr. Kim's email. She understood immediately that this was the beginning of my transition from student researcher to professional innovator. "Jessica, this is extraordinary," she said. "Clinical application in your first year out of undergraduate? Most researchers spend decades trying to bridge that gap. You're going to change how cardiac care is delivered." That afternoon, I updated my achievement wall with Dr. Kim's email, printing it on high-quality paper and framing it with special care. But for the first time, I also did something else. I took a photo of my entire achievement display and sent it to Madison with a message. 4 years of work leading to this moment. Real-world medical applications. Madison responded immediately with a string of celebration emojis and a voice message where she practically sang with excitement about my breakthrough. Then she asked, "Have you told your family about the UCLA opportunity?" I hadn't, and I realized I wasn't going to. Not because I was angry with them, but because I'd finally learned the difference between seeking validation and sharing joy. I wanted to share this achievement with people who could appreciate its significance, not waste emotional energy trying to convince people who couldn't or wouldn't understand. That evening, I called Dr. Kim to discuss the technical details of implementing my monitoring system in their cardiac unit. We spent an hour talking through the specifications, patient population, and data collection protocols. By the end of the call, we'd outlined a pilot program that could begin as early as the following fall. Hanging up the phone, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation. I'd built something meaningful, something that would make a real difference in people's lives. The fact that my family couldn't see its value didn't diminish its importance. I was finally learning to measure my worth by the impact of my work rather than the enthusiasm of my audience. And that shift in perspective, more than any achievement, felt like the beginning of my real independence. Part 5. The Discovery of Deception. The unraveling of Sophia's carefully constructed image began with something as mundane as a misplaced phone charger. It was late April of my senior year, and I was home for the weekend to attend my grandmother's birthday celebration. Sophia had left her phone charging in the kitchen overnight, and when I went to make coffee the next morning, I accidentally knocked the charger loose. Her phone screen lit up with notifications, and I couldn't help but notice an email thread visible in her preview window. The subject line read, "Application Status Update, West Coast Dance Intensive," and something about the sender's name caught my attention. It wasn't from any dance program or artistic organization. It was from someone called Resume Builder Pro. I should have just plugged her phone back in and minded my own business, but after years of hearing about Sophia's prestigious workshops, competitive programs, and professional opportunities, my curiosity got the better of me. I picked up her phone to move it away from the coffee maker, and the preview text was visible without unlocking the device. "Hi, Sophia. Attached is your revised dance resume with enhanced descriptions of your workshop, experiences, and teaching credentials. Remember, it's all about presentation and impact. Let me know if you'd like to upgrade to our premium package for even more impressive formatting." My stomach dropped. Enhanced descriptions. Premium packages for impressive formatting. This wasn't correspondence about actual dance programs. This was someone helping Sophia embellish her credentials. I should have stopped looking right then, but something compelled me to understand what I was seeing. When Sophia came into the kitchen 10 minutes later, I casually handed her the phone and mentioned that it had gotten unplugged. "Oh, thanks," she said, immediately checking her messages. I watched her face carefully as she scrolled through the notifications, and I caught a flicker of something, concern, maybe, or guilt, when she reached that particular email thread. Over the next few hours, I found myself paying closer attention to the way Sophia talked about her dance career when relatives asked about her recent activities. She mentioned the West Coast Dance Intensive as if it were a done deal, describing the competitive application process and how excited she was about working with renowned choreographers. But now I was listening with different ears, noting the vague details and carefully worded responses that could be interpreted multiple ways. When my aunt asked about the dates for the intensive, Sophia said they were still finalizing the schedule and changed the subject to something else. When my uncle asked about the cost and whether she'd received any scholarship assistance, Sophia gave a complicated answer about different funding options and waiting to hear back about financial aid. Nothing she said was technically false, but it wasn't the straightforward description of an accepted participant that everyone was hearing. That afternoon, while Sophia was showing my younger cousins some dance combinations in the backyard, I found myself alone with her laptop in the living room. She'd left it open to check something quickly and then gotten distracted by the impromptu dance lesson happening outside. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at her browser history. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about my sister's dance career. Multiple tabs were open to websites, offering services for enhancing artistic resumes, professional portfolio development, and creative career coaching. One site specialized in helping dancers present their experience in the most competitive light possible, with testimonials from clients who had successfully elevated their profiles for auditions and applications. But more disturbing were the search terms in her browser history: how to make workshop experience sound professional, dance resume padding techniques, fake it till you make it performing arts, and creating impressive dance portfolio with limited experience. I felt sick. This wasn't just about making her resume look prettier or describing her experience in more compelling language. This was about systematically misrepresenting her background and qualifications to create an impression of success that didn't exist. I closed the laptop and walked outside, trying to process what I'd discovered. Watching Sophia teach my cousins simple ballet positions, I saw her differently now. She was genuinely talented and clearly enjoyed dance, but there was a huge gap between her actual experience and the professional career she'd been describing to our family. The workshops she'd attended were real, but they were mostly beginner and intermediate level programs that anyone could join with minimal experience. The master classes she talked about were often drop-in sessions offered at local studios, not intensive training with renowned professionals. The auditions she Mentioned were frequently open calls that hundreds of dancers attended with very low selection rates. None of this made her less talented or less deserving of pursuing dance, but it did make her fundamentally dishonest about her level of professional development. And it made me understand why my parents had been so willing to prioritize her career opportunities over my academic achievements. They believed she was at a much more advanced level than she actually was. Over the next few weeks, I found myself noticing other inconsistencies in Sophia's stories. She'd mentioned working with a choreographer who had performed on a popular television show, but when I looked him up, it turned out he'd been a background dancer in one episode and now taught classes at a strip mall studio. Her featured performance at a downtown theater was actually a student showcase where every participant got equal stage time. The pattern became impossible to ignore once I started paying attention. Sophia had become an expert at taking ordinary dance experiences and presenting them as extraordinary professional opportunities. She wasn't lying exactly, but she was spinning every truth in ways that created false impressions about her career trajectory. What bothered me most wasn't the embellishment itself, but the way my parents had responded to these inflated achievements, while dismissing my genuine academic accomplishments. They'd rearranged work schedules and family plans to support what they believed were significant career milestones, while treating my actual publication in peer-reviewed journals as routine academic work. The irony was devastating. I'd been working harder than ever to achieve authentic success that could speak for itself, while Sophia had been working equally hard to make modest achievements appear more impressive than they were. And our parents' enthusiastic response to her manufactured milestones had only encouraged both patterns to continue. I didn't confront Sophia directly about what I'd discovered. Part of me felt guilty for snooping, and part of me wasn't sure what confronting her would accomplish. The damage had already been done in terms of how our achievements were perceived and valued within our family. Instead, I found myself withdrawing even further from sharing my own milestones with my parents. If they were so easily impressed by Sophia's enhanced descriptions of routine dance activities, how could I trust their reactions to my genuine breakthroughs in biomedical research? If they couldn't distinguish between real professional advancement and cleverly packaged amateur experiences, what was the point of seeking their validation for my authentic accomplishments? The final piece of Sophia's deception revealed itself 2 weeks before graduation, and it was the most brazen example, yet of how far she was willing to go to maintain her fabricated image of success. I was home for a brief visit to pick up some belongings I'd need for my move to Baltimore, when I overheard my mom on the phone with my Aunt Carmen, excitedly describing Sophia's latest career breakthrough. She just got accepted into this incredible summer program in New York, my mom was saying, her voice bubbling with pride. It's with some of the most prestigious dance companies in the country. They only accept 20 dancers nationwide, and Sophia was one of them. Can you believe it? I paused in the hallway, confused. Sophia hadn't mentioned any summer program acceptance to me, and given what I'd discovered about her tendency to embellish, I was immediately suspicious. The program covers everything: housing, training, even stipends for living expenses, my mom continued. It's basically a guarantee that she'll be able to work professionally after graduation. The connections she'll make could change everything for her career. This was news to me, and it sounded too good to be true. Elite summer dance programs were incredibly competitive, and legitimate ones didn't typically offer comprehensive financial packages to participants. Most required substantial payment from students or their families. When my mom finished her call, I casually asked about Sophia's summer plans. "Oh, didn't she tell you?" my mom said, beaming. "She got into this amazing intensive program in Manhattan. It's going to cost us about $8,000. But it's such an incredible opportunity that we're happy to make the investment." $8,000. So much for the stipends for living expenses that had been described to my aunt. This wasn't a prestigious program offering financial support to exceptional dancers. This was an expensive workshop that anyone could attend if they could afford the fees. "What's the name of the program?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Let me think. It was something like Manhattan Dance Collective or Metropolitan Dance Institute. Sophia has all the details. She's been working so hard to prepare for the audition process. That evening, I did my own research. Manhattan Dance Collective was indeed a real organization, but it wasn't the elite professional program my mother had described. It was a commercial dance school that offered summer workshops to anyone willing to pay their fees. Their website featured testimonials from satisfied customers, not announcements about competitive selections or career placements. The audition process Sophia had mentioned was actually just a brief video submission required for registration purposes, designed to help instructors understand participants' skill levels for class placement. It wasn't a competitive selection at all. It was a customer service tool. Most damning of all, the program's own marketing materials emphasized that it welcomed dancers of all levels and promised a supportive, non-competitive environment where participants could explore their artistic potential without pressure. This was the exact opposite of the elite professional intensive my parents believed Sophia had been accepted into. I realized that Sophia had once again taken a perfectly ordinary dance opportunity and presented it to our parents as something extraordinary. She'd probably found the program online, applied like any other customer, and then spun the acceptance as a competitive achievement that warranted significant financial investment from our parents. What made this particular deception especially galling was the timing. While Sophia was convincing our parents to spend $8,000 on what amounted to an expensive vacation disguised as professional development, I was preparing to move across the country for graduate school on my own dime. My parents had never offered to help with my moving expenses, my security deposits, or any of the costs associated with relocating for my education. When I'd mentioned that setting up an apartment in Baltimore would be expensive, my dad had suggested I look into affordable housing options and maybe consider getting a roommate to split costs. But they were happy to spend $8,000 on a dance workshop for Sophia without hesitation because they believed it was an investment in her professional future. The inequality was staggering. I was moving to one of the most prestigious research institutions in the country to work with a world-renowned scientist on potentially life-saving medical technology, but I was expected to figure out the logistics and expenses on my own. Sophia was signing up for a summer dance class, but she was receiving enthusiastic financial support because she'd convinced our parents it was a career-defining opportunity. I wanted to expose the truth about Sophia's manufactured achievements, but I also recognized that doing so would accomplish nothing positive. My parents wanted to believe in Sophia's dance career, and they'd proven repeatedly that they preferred her compelling fiction to my uncomfortable reality. Instead of confronting the deception directly, I made a decision that felt both liberating and terrifying. I stopped trying to compete for their attention entirely. I'd spent 4 years working harder and achieving more than I'd ever thought possible, hoping that eventually my accomplishments would be so impressive that my parents would have to acknowledge them. But I finally understood that their lack of recognition wasn't about the magnitude of my achievements. It was about their fundamental inability to value what I was building. They could celebrate Sophia's fake milestones with genuine enthusiasm while treating my authentic breakthroughs with polite indifference, not because they were malicious, but because they'd already decided which daughter's life they wanted to understand and support. That realization was painful, but it was also oddly freeing. I'd been carrying the emotional burden of seeking their approval for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to pursue my goals purely for my own satisfaction and growth. The week before graduation, I made several decisions that marked my complete independence from their validation system. First, I stopped sharing any information about my future plans beyond the basic facts they already knew. They were aware that I was attending Johns Hopkins for graduate school, but I didn't mention my full funding package, my research assistantship, or the prestigious lab I'd be joining. Second, I began making my own arrangements for graduation day, assuming they wouldn't be there and planning accordingly. I invited Professor Chen and her family to attend the ceremony as my guests. and I asked Madison if she wanted to take photos together after the presentation of diplomas. Third, I started building stronger connections with the people who actually understood and appreciated my work. I scheduled regular check-ins with Dr. Hernandez to prepare for my transition to her lab, and I joined online communities for women in biomedical engineering, where I could share my achievements with people who recognized their significance. Most importantly, I began planning my post-graduation life around my own priorities and values rather than trying to demonstrate my worth to people who couldn't see it. I researched Baltimore neighborhoods based on proximity to campus and quality of life rather than trying to impress anyone with expensive choices. I made a budget that prioritized my research needs and personal growth over appearances. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a life that belonged entirely to me, free from the exhausting cycle of achievement and disappointment that had defined my relationship with my family. The irony wasn't lost on me that in the same week I was learning to stop seeking my parents' approval, I received recognition from sources that actually mattered in my field. Dr. Kim from UCLA sent me a detailed proposal for implementing my cardiac monitoring system in their hospital, including a timeline for clinical trials and potential publication opportunities. Professor Chen nominated me for the university's Outstanding Undergraduate Researcher Award, which came with a $1,000 prize and recognition at a special ceremony for academic excellence. The nomination letter she shared with me described my work as groundbreaking research with immediate clinical applications and praised my innovative approach to cardiac event prediction. I celebrated these achievements privately, printing the relevant documentation and adding it to my personal collection of accomplishments. But I also felt a new kind of satisfaction that wasn't dependent on anyone else's reaction. These recognitions mattered because they validated the quality of my work and opened doors for future opportunities, not because they might finally convince my parents to pay attention. The shift in my perspective became complete when I realized I was no longer disappointed by their indifference. When my mom called to update me on Sophia's preparations for her expensive summer program, I listened with detached interest rather than the familiar sting of resentment. "She's been taking extra classes to prepare," my mom said excitedly. "The instructors say she has real professional potential. This program could be the launchpad for everything she's been working toward." "That's nice," I replied, and I genuinely meant it. If Sophia wanted to spend the summer in an overpriced dance workshop, and if my parents wanted to fund it while believing they were investing in her career, that was their choice. It had nothing to do with me or my value as a person. "How are your graduation preparations going?" my mom asked, almost as an afterthought. "Everything's on track," I said. "I'm looking forward to starting the next chapter." I didn't mention that the next chapter included working with one of the most respected researchers in my field, or that my algorithm was being prepared for clinical testing, or that I'd been invited to present my research at an international conference in the fall. Those achievements belong to me now, not to anyone else's opinion of them. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking at the achievement wall I'd been building for 3 years. Soon, I'd be taking it down to pack for my move to Baltimore. But the physical display had served its purpose. It had taught me to recognize and celebrate my own accomplishments even when no one else would. I realized that my parents' favoritism toward Sophia had inadvertently given me something valuable: the ability to find validation from within rather than constantly seeking it from external sources. While Sophia had learned to depend on their approval and financial support, I'd learned to create my own recognition system and build my own success. In trying to make me invisible, they'd actually made me invincible. I no longer needed their acknowledgement to feel confident in my abilities or proud of my achievements. I'd learned to measure my worth by the impact of my work and the respect of my peers, not by the enthusiasm of my family. The morning of graduation arrived bright and clear, and I woke up in my apartment feeling genuinely excited about the ceremony for the first time. Not because I hoped my parents would finally see my value, but because I was ready to celebrate 4 years of hard work and the beginning of an even more promising future. I dressed carefully in my cap and gown, pinning the honor cords I'd earned for academic excellence and research achievement. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone who had learned to be proud of herself without permission from anyone else. Professor Chen had texted me that morning to say she was bringing her entire family to watch me walk across the stage. Madison had arranged to take photos with all our engineering friends after the ceremony. Dr. Hernandez had even sent a congratulations email from Baltimore, expressing her excitement about our upcoming collaboration. I was surrounded by people who understood what I'd accomplished and were genuinely excited about what I would build next. The fact that my parents had chosen Sophia's dance competition over my graduation didn't diminish the significance of this moment. It simply meant they would miss witnessing something remarkable. As I walked toward campus, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was finally free from the exhausting cycle of seeking approval from people who couldn't provide it, and I was ready to step into a future built entirely on my own terms. The real celebration was just beginning. The morning of graduation arrived with the kind of perfect California weather that made everything feel possible. The sky was clear and bright, with just enough breeze to keep the outdoor ceremony comfortable despite the formal caps and gowns. I woke up in my studio apartment at 6:30, not because I needed to be anywhere early, but because I'd been too excited to sleep properly. For the first time in 4 years, I was genuinely looking forward to a major milestone without the accompanying anxiety about my family's reaction. I'd stopped expecting them to understand the significance of what I'd accomplished, which paradoxically made me feel more proud of my achievements than ever before. I took my time getting ready, pressing my graduation gown carefully and arranging my honor cords with precision. The gold cord for Magna Cum Laude, the blue cord for outstanding research achievement, and the silver cord for leadership in engineering organizations. Each one represented hundreds of hours of work and dedication that I'd learned to value independently of anyone else's recognition. Professor Chen had texted me the night before to confirm that she and her family would be attending the ceremony. Madison had coordinated with our entire engineering friend group to sit together and celebrate as a cohort. Dr. Hernandez had sent flowers to my apartment with a note that read, "Congratulations on your remarkable undergraduate career. Baltimore is lucky to have you." These gestures meant more to me than any family celebration could have, because they came from people who truly understood what I'd built over the past 4 years. They recognized the significance of my research, the dedication required for my achievements, and the potential impact of my future work. My phone showed several text messages from family members. My grandmother had sent a sweet note in Spanish, saying she was proud of her brilliant granddaughter and sorry she couldn't travel for the ceremony. My cousin Elena wished me luck and asked for photos from the day. Even my Aunt Carmen, who lived across the country, had remembered to send congratulations. But there were no messages from my parents. They were already in Los Angeles with Sophia, preparing for her dance competition that had somehow become more important than their other daughter's college graduation. I'd made peace with their absence, or so I thought. But standing in my apartment, fully dressed in my graduation regalia and ready to walk across the stage to receive my degree, I felt a familiar ache of disappointment. Not because I still needed their approval, but because they were missing something beautiful that we could have shared together. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 10, and I arrived at campus by 8:30 to check in with my department and connect with the other engineering graduates. The energy was infectious. Students and families everywhere, flowers and cameras, proud faces and excited chatter about the future. Professor Chen found me near the engineering building and introduced me to her husband and teenage daughter, who were both excited to meet the student whose research their wife and mother had been praising for months. Her daughter, who was interested in pursuing science herself, asked thoughtful questions about my cardiac monitoring work and my plans for graduate school. "Your research sounds like it could help so many people," she said with genuine admiration. "That must feel amazing, knowing that your work might save lives." It did feel amazing, and hearing her articulate it reminded me why I'd fallen in love with biomedical engineering in the first place. The goal had never been to impress my parents or compete with Sophia for attention. The goal was to contribute something meaningful to the world, to use my skills and knowledge to make a difference in people's lives. Madison appeared with our friend group, all of us wearing our various honor cords and practically glowing with pride and excitement. We took photos together, celebrating not just our individual achievements, but our collective success in one of the most challenging academic programs the university offered. "Can you believe we actually did it?" Madison said, adjusting her cap for the dozenth time. 4 years ago, I wasn't even sure I could handle the coursework, and now we're all heading off to amazing opportunities. She was right. Looking around at my classmates, I saw future doctors, researchers, industry innovators, and entrepreneurs. We'd pushed each other to excel, supported each other through difficult periods, and celebrated each other's victories with genuine enthusiasm. We'd created the kind of academic community I'd been seeking all along. As we lined up for the processional, I felt my phone buzz with a text message. For a moment, I hoped it might be from my parents, perhaps a last-minute message of support or encouragement. Instead, it was from Sophia. "Good luck today. Wish I could be there, but you know how important today is for my career. Break a leg or whatever they say for graduations." The casual dismissal stung more than I expected. Even Sophia, who was supposedly pursuing her own dreams in the competitive dance world, couldn't acknowledge that my graduation might be equally important for my career. The message was friendly on the surface, but it reinforced the family narrative, that her artistic pursuits were inherently more valuable and deserving of support than my academic achievements. I put my phone away without responding and focused on the present moment. Whatever was happening with Sophia's dance competition in Los Angeles, I was here at my graduation, surrounded by people who understood and appreciated what I'd accomplished. The processional began with the faculty leading the way in their colorful academic robes, followed by graduate students, and then undergraduates organized by department. The engineering students were near the front, which meant I'd have a good view of the entire ceremony and wouldn't have to wait long for my moment on stage. As we filed into the outdoor amphitheater, I was struck by how beautiful everything looked. The university had decorated the stage with flowers and banners, and the California mountains provided a stunning backdrop for the ceremony. Families filled the seating areas, many holding professional cameras and elaborate bouquets. I spotted Professor Chen and her family in the third row, and Madison's parents who had driven down from Sacramento with a huge sign that read, "Congratulations, Madison and Jessica." They'd included me even though they barely knew me, simply because Madison had told them how much our friendship meant to her. The ceremony began with the traditional academic pomp, welcoming remarks from the university president, recognition of distinguished faculty, and acknowledgement of the graduating class's collective achievements. The speakers emphasized themes of service, innovation, and responsibility, reminding us that our education was not just a personal accomplishment, but a foundation for contributing to society. When they reached the individual department recognitions, I felt my heart rate increase. The engineering school was known for celebrating outstanding students, and I knew there was a possibility I might receive special recognition beyond my honor cords. Dean Martinez stepped to the podium and began describing the exceptional achievements of the engineering graduating class. She mentioned our high placement rates in graduate programs and industry positions, our research publications and patent applications, and our commitment to using technology to solve real-world problems. This year's graduating class includes several students whose undergraduate research has already begun making an impact beyond the university, she said, consulting her notes. Their work represents the kind of innovation and dedication that defines our program's mission. She called several names for special recognition, including students who had secured prestigious fellowships, been accepted to top graduate programs, or developed technology with commercial applications. Each recognition was met with enthusiastic applause from the audience. Then she paused and smiled in my direction. I'd like to offer special recognition to Jessica Rodriguez, whose research in cardiac monitoring technology has been accepted for clinical testing at UCLA Medical Center. Jessica's algorithm for early detection of cardiac events has the potential to prevent heart attacks and save lives, representing exactly the kind of innovative thinking we hope to inspire in all our students. The applause that followed was thunderous. My classmates cheered, Professor Chen's family stood up, and Madison grabbed my arm with excitement. For a moment, I felt completely overwhelmed by the public recognition of work I'd been pursuing quietly for years. But the recognition wasn't finished. Dean Martinez continued. Jessica will be attending Johns Hopkins University in the fall to continue her research with Dr. Patricia Hernandez, one of the leading authorities in cardiac device development. We're proud to have supported the early stages of what promises to be a groundbreaking career in biomedical engineering. More applause, more cheering from my friends and supporters. I felt tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of being truly seen and appreciated for my work. As the individual degree presentations began, I realized that my parents were missing more than just a ceremonial walk across the stage. They were missing the moment when their daughter was publicly recognized as an outstanding student and researcher, when her work was described as potentially life-saving, when her future was acknowledged as promising and important. When my name was called to receive my diploma, I walked across the stage with my head high, accepting congratulations from the dean and posing for the official photographer. The moment felt perfect and complete, even without my family there to witness it. After the ceremony concluded, I was surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Professor Chen's husband shook my hand and said he was honored to meet someone whose research might help cardiac patients like his father. Madison's parents insisted on taking photos with me and expressed amazement at my achievements. Dr. Kim from UCLA had even made the drive up from Los Angeles to attend the ceremony and introduce herself in person. I wanted to meet the brilliant young researcher whose work we'll be implementing in our cardiac unit, she said warmly. Your algorithm could revolutionize how we monitor high-risk patients. Standing in the sunshine, surrounded by people who understood and celebrated my achievements, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment that had nothing to do with my family's approval. I'd built something meaningful, earned recognition from respected professionals in my field, and created opportunities for future impact. My phone buzzed with messages throughout the afternoon. Congratulations from classmates, former professors, and professional contacts who had seen news of my recognition on social media. Several biomedical engineering companies reached out about potential collaboration opportunities. A science journalist requested an interview about my cardiac monitoring research, but there were still no messages from my parents. Finally, around 4 p.m, my phone rang with a call from home. My heart jumped despite myself, hoping they had somehow learned about my special recognition and were calling to congratulate me. Jessica, how did the ceremony go? My mom's voice was cheerful but distracted. It went really well, I said carefully. I received special recognition for my research, and there were some exciting opportunities discussed for the future. That's wonderful, sweetheart. We're so proud of you. Her tone suggested she was multitasking, probably getting ready for Sophia's competition that evening. I waited for her to ask for details about the recognition or express curiosity about the opportunities I'd mentioned. Instead, she launched into an excited description of Sophia's day. Sophia's competition has been incredible. She performed her solo piece this afternoon and absolutely nailed it. The judges looked impressed, and several other dancers complimented her technique. We're waiting for results now, but she's already talking about how much she's learned from the experience. That's great, I said, feeling the familiar mix of frustration and resignation. Oh, and you'll never believe what happened. One of the other dancers told Sophia about auditions for a music video next month. It's for an independent artist, but still, It could be amazing exposure. Sophia's going to submit an audition tape when we get home. Music video auditions for an independent artist. After everything I'd achieved at graduation, after the public recognition and the clinical applications and the graduate school opportunities, my mother was more excited about the possibility of Sophia appearing in a low-budget music video. "That sounds like an opportunity," I said neutrally. "We feel so blessed that both our daughters are following their dreams," my mom continued. "Sophia's artistic career is really taking off, and you're doing well with your engineering studies. We couldn't be prouder." Doing well with my engineering studies. My groundbreaking research had been reduced to doing well with studies, while Sophia's routine dance competition was characterized as a career taking off. "I should probably go," I said. "I have some things to take care of related to my move to Baltimore." "Of course, sweetheart. We'll talk soon. Love you." After hanging up, I sat in my car in the university parking lot, processing the conversation. They'd missed my entire graduation ceremony, including my special recognition for research that could save lives, and they'd managed to discuss the day without expressing any curiosity about what they'd missed. The contrast was so stark, it was almost funny. While they were celebrating the possibility of Sophia getting a background role in an amateur music video, I'd been publicly recognized for developing technology that would be implemented in hospital cardiac units. While they were focused on her artistic career taking off, based on a single competition, I'd been accepted to work with the leading researcher in my field at one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the country. But here's what I realized sitting in that parking lot. Their inability to recognize my achievements no longer had the power to diminish my sense of accomplishment. I'd spent the day surrounded by people who understood the significance of what I'd built and who were excited about what I would create next. Professor Chen had already sent me several research papers to review before starting at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Kim had scheduled a call for the following week to discuss the technical details of implementing my algorithm. Dr. Hernandez had emailed with a welcome packet for new graduate students and a reading list to prepare for my first semester. My professional life was launching in ways that exceeded my most optimistic expectations, and it was happening because of the quality of my work, not because of my family's support or recognition. That evening, I celebrated with Madison and our engineering friends at a restaurant near campus. We shared stories from the ceremony, discussed our various post-graduation plans, and toasted to 4 years of friendship and mutual support. "To Jessica," Madison said, raising her glass, "whose research is going to save actual lives, and to all of us, for proving that hard work and dedication really do pay off." It was the perfect ending to the perfect day. I'd graduated with honors, received public recognition for my research, connected with professionals who valued my work, and celebrated with friends who truly understood what I'd accomplished. My parents had chosen Sophia's dance competition over my graduation, but their absence hadn't diminished the significance of the moment. If anything, it had clarified that my worth wasn't dependent on their recognition, and that the most meaningful celebrations came from people who could actually appreciate what was being celebrated. 3 weeks later, I loaded my belongings into a rental truck and began the drive to Baltimore to start my graduate program. My achievement wall was carefully packed in a box marked office decorations, ready to be hung in my new apartment where it would remind me of how far I'd come. As I drove across the country toward my new life, I felt a profound sense of freedom. I was no longer carrying the emotional burden of seeking approval from people who couldn't provide it. I was no longer waiting for my family to understand the value of what I was building. Instead, I was focused on the future I was creating through my own efforts and choices. A future where my achievements mattered because they contributed to meaningful work, not because they impressed anyone in particular. A future built on authentic success rather than the appearance of success. The graduation ceremony had been everything I'd hoped it would be, not because my family was there to witness it, but because I'd finally learned to celebrate myself without needing permission from anyone else. 6 months into my graduate program at Johns Hopkins, I was sitting in Dr. Hernandez's lab on a rainy Thursday evening, running final tests on the latest iteration of my cardiac monitoring algorithm. The lab was quiet except for the gentle hum of computers and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment, creating the kind of focused atmosphere that had become my sanctuary. My algorithm had evolved significantly since my undergraduate research. Working with Dr. Hernandez's team, we'd refined the detection parameters and expanded the system's capabilities to identify even more subtle cardiac irregularities. The UCLA pilot program had exceeded all expectations, successfully predicting cardiac events in 12 patients who might otherwise have experienced undetected heart attacks. Dr. Kim had called that morning with results from their latest data analysis. "Jessica, your system identified warning signs an average of 14 hours before our traditional monitoring would have caught them," she'd said, her voice filled with excitement. "We're talking about giving doctors and patients nearly a full day of advance warning. The implications for treatment and prevention are extraordinary." 14 hours. 14 hours that could mean the difference between life and death for cardiac patients. 14 hours that families could spend with loved ones instead of mourning unexpected losses. The magnitude of what we'd created still took my breath away sometimes. I was documenting the evening's test results when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Opening it, I found a photo that made me smile despite the late hour. It was from Professor Chen's daughter, who had started her freshman year as a biomedical engineering major, inspired in part by our conversation at my graduation ceremony. "Dr. Rodriguez," the message read, "I know you're technically still a graduate student, but you're already Dr. Rodriguez to me. Just finished my first semester of engineering calculus, and I'm loving it. Thank you for showing me what's possible in this field. Hope your research is changing the world." Messages like this had become surprisingly common over the past months. Word about my cardiac monitoring work had spread through academic and medical communities, leading to interview requests, conference invitations, and correspondence from students interested in biomedical research. I'd somehow become a visible representative of young women succeeding in engineering, which felt both humbling and empowering. The international conference presentation I'd given in October had particularly resonated with people. My talk, titled "Bridging the Gap: From Algorithm to Patient Care," had been viewed over 50,000 times online and featured in several medical technology publications. The response had opened doors I'd never imagined, including collaboration offers from research teams in Europe and Asia. But perhaps more meaningful than the professional recognition were the personal connections I'd built with other researchers who shared my passion for using technology to improve patient outcomes. Dr. Hernandez had introduced me to a network of women scientists who met monthly to discuss their research and support each other's career development. These women had become the mentors and colleagues I'd always hoped to find. They celebrated breakthrough moments with genuine enthusiasm, offered guidance during challenging periods, and treated my ideas with the respect and consideration they deserved. For the first time in my life, I was part of a community where intellectual achievement was valued as highly as I'd always believed it should be. My phone rang, interrupting my documentation work. The caller ID showed my grandmother's number, which always made me smile. Abuela had been the one family member who consistently celebrated my achievements, even when she didn't fully understand the technical details. "Mija," her warm voice filled the lab. "I hope I'm not calling too late. I know you work very hard." "Never too late for you, Abuela," I said, leaning back in my chair. "How are you feeling?" "Much better since my doctor started using that new heart monitoring system," she said. "He told me it was developed by a brilliant young researcher." And I said, "That sounds like something my granddaughter would create." Imagine my surprise when he said it was. I sat up straighter. "Dr. Martinez is using my algorithm?" "Sí, mija." He showed me the computer screen with all the graphs and numbers, and he said this new system can predict heart problems before they happen. He's very excited about it. And when I told him you were my granddaughter, He couldn't believe it. He wants to meet you the next time you visit. The realization that my research was being used to monitor my own grandmother's heart health felt surreal and deeply meaningful. Dr. Martinez was a cardiologist in her small town who worked primarily with elderly patients who couldn't travel to larger medical centers. If he was implementing my algorithm, it meant the technology was reaching exactly the population that could benefit most from early cardiac event detection. He says you're going to save many lives, Jessica. I always knew you were special, but this is bigger than I ever imagined. After we hung up, I sat quietly in the lab, processing what she'd told me. My grandmother's cardiologist was using technology I'd developed to keep her healthy. Patients I'd never meet were receiving better cardiac care because of algorithms I'd written during late nights in my undergraduate lab. This was the impact I'd dreamed of creating when I first became interested in biomedical engineering. Not just publishing papers or receiving academic recognition, but developing solutions that actually improved people's lives in measurable ways. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from my parents. I hesitated before answering, as I always did when I saw their number. Our conversations had become infrequent and superficial since graduation, maintaining the basic connection of family while avoiding any topics that might highlight our fundamental differences in values and priorities. Jessica, how are you, sweetheart? My mom's voice was cheerful, carrying the forced enthusiasm that had become characteristic of our interactions. I'm doing well, Mom. Just finishing up some lab work. That's wonderful. You're always so dedicated to your studies. The word studies still grated on me, reducing years of groundbreaking research to something that sounded like homework, assignments. How are things at home? I asked, steering the conversation towards safer territory. Oh, we have exciting news. Sophia just booked her first commercial gig. It's for a local furniture store, but she'll be featured prominently in their holiday campaign. They're paying her $1,500 for 2 days of work. $1,500 for a furniture commercial. I made more than that in a week as a research assistant, not counting the value of my full tuition coverage and healthcare benefits. But I'd learned to respond to these updates with appropriate enthusiasm rather than pointing out the disparities. That's great for her, I said. I'm sure she's excited about the opportunity. We're all so proud. She's really building her professional portfolio. The commercial director said she has natural screen presence and might recommend her for other projects. Natural screen presence. After everything I'd accomplished in biomedical research, my parents were still more excited about Sophia's potential for appearing in advertisements than about my work developing life-saving medical technology. That sounds promising, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. How are your classes going? My mom asked, as she always did, framing my research and dissertation work as if I were still an undergraduate taking required courses. I'd stopped trying to explain the difference between graduate coursework and independent research. Instead, I gave the kind of brief, positive update that satisfied their need to check on me without requiring them to engage with the details of my actual work. Everything's going well. My research is progressing nicely, and I'm learning a lot from working with Dr. Hernandez. That's wonderful. You've always been so good at figuring things out on your own. There it was again, the familiar refrain that framed my independence as a personality trait, rather than recognizing it as a response to their lack of support. They'd convinced themselves that I didn't need encouragement or recognition because I was naturally self-sufficient, which allowed them to focus their attention elsewhere without feeling guilty. After we hung up, I felt the familiar mixture of sadness and relief that accompanied most of our conversations. Sadness because I still wished for parents who could celebrate my achievements with genuine understanding and enthusiasm. Relief because I no longer depended on their validation for my sense of self-worth. The contrast between my grandmother's excited call about my research and my parents' indifferent check-in was striking. Abuela had taken the time to learn about my work and understand its significance, while my parents continued to treat my career as background noise in their lives. But I'd built such a strong support system in Baltimore that their emotional distance no longer left me feeling isolated or unappreciated. Dr. Hernandez had become not just a research advisor, but a mentor who actively invested in my professional development. She introduced me to important contacts in the field, nominated me for prestigious fellowships, and treated my ideas as valuable contributions to our shared work. My fellow graduate students had become close friends who understood the pressures and rewards of pursuing advanced research. We studied together, celebrated each other's breakthroughs, and provided emotional support during the inevitable frustrations of experimental work. I'd found the intellectual community I'd been seeking throughout my undergraduate years. The professional recognition continued to grow as well. 2 medical device companies had reached out about potential licensing agreements for my cardiac monitoring technology. A major research foundation had invited me to apply for a fellowship that would fund my doctoral work and provide additional resources for expanding my research. Most exciting of all, Dr. Hernandez had suggested that I consider presenting my work at the World Congress of Cardiology, the most prestigious international conference in the field. She believed my research on early cardiac event detection was significant enough to warrant presentation to the global cardiology community. Jessica, your work is reaching a level of impact that most researchers don't achieve until much later in their careers, she told me during our last meeting. You should be proud of what you've accomplished and excited about what's possible going forward. I was proud, and I was excited. But more than that, I was grateful for the journey that had brought me to this point. The years of feeling overlooked and undervalued by my family had taught me to find validation from within and to build relationships with people who could appreciate my work on its own merits. On a snowy Saturday in February, I received an email that crystallized everything I'd learned about success and recognition. It was from Dr. Sarah Kim at UCLA, informing me that their hospital system had decided to implement my cardiac monitoring algorithm across all their cardiac care units. The pilot program results were so compelling that our board approved system-wide adoption, she wrote. We estimate that your technology will be monitoring approximately 8,000 cardiac patients annually within our network. Based on the pilot data, we project preventing 60 to 80 cardiac events per year that would otherwise go undetected until too late. 60 to 80 lives per year, in just one hospital system. And this was only the beginning. Other medical centers were expressing interest in implementing the technology, and each adoption would mean more lives saved through early detection and intervention. I printed the email and added it to the achievement collection I'd recreated in my Baltimore apartment. The display had grown significantly since my undergraduate days, now including conference presentations, publication acceptances, patent approvals, and implementation agreements that represented the transition from theoretical research to practical medical applications. Looking at the wall, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. I'd built something meaningful, something that would continue making a difference in people's lives long after I'd moved on to other projects. That evening, I called Madison to share the news about the UCLA implementation. She was completing her medical residency in Chicago and understood better than most people what the adoption of my technology meant for patient care. Jessica, this is incredible, she screamed into the phone. Do you realize what you've done? You've created something that's going to become standard cardiac care. Doctors across the country are going to be using technology you developed as an undergraduate. Her excitement was infectious and genuine, reminding me of all the reasons. I valued friendships built on mutual understanding and shared appreciation for meaningful work. I keep thinking about how this started, I told her. Remember when I was printing my own certificates and celebrating alone in my dorm room? I never imagined it would lead to something like this. But it makes perfect sense, Madison replied. You were always driven by wanting to make a real difference, not just seeking recognition. That authenticity is what made your research so compelling from the beginning. She was right. The motivation had always been about developing solutions to medical problems, not about impressing my family or competing for attention. The recognition and professional success had followed naturally from pursuing work that I genuinely cared about. Later that month, I received an unexpected email from Sophia. We'd maintained minimal contact since graduation, exchanging brief holiday greetings and family update messages, but not much else. "Hey Jessica," she wrote. "I saw an article about your research in a magazine at the doctor's office. The headline was something like, 'Young Scientist's Algorithm Saves Lives.' I had no idea your work was such a big deal. Mom and Dad probably don't understand how impressive this is, but I wanted you to know that I'm really proud of you. Love, Sophia." The message surprised me with its sincerity and insight. Sophia had recognized something that our parents couldn't, or wouldn't see, that my research represented significant achievement worthy of pride and recognition. Her acknowledgement felt meaningful precisely because it was unexpected and unforced. I wrote back thanking her for the kind words and congratulating her on her recent commercial booking. For the first time in years, our exchange felt genuine, rather than performative, acknowledging our different paths without judgment or comparison. Spring brought a cascade of new opportunities and recognitions. The Research Foundation awarded me the fellowship Dr. Hernandez had encouraged me to pursue, providing full funding for the remainder of my doctoral program, plus additional resources for expanding my cardiac monitoring research. The World Congress of Cardiology accepted my presentation proposal, inviting me to present my work to an international audience of cardiologists, researchers, and medical technology developers. At 22, I would be one of the youngest presenters in the conference's history. A prominent medical technology journal featured my research on their cover, with an accompanying editorial about the potential for young researchers to drive innovation in cardiac care. The article included quotes from several prominent cardiologists praising the clinical significance of my work. Each recognition felt meaningful, not because it proved my worth to skeptical family members, but because it validated the path I'd chosen and opened doors for continued impact in my field. I'd learned to measure success by the quality of opportunities it created, rather than by the enthusiasm of specific audiences. As I prepared for my presentation at the World Congress, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that graduation day when my parents chose Sophia's dance competition over my ceremony. Their absence from that milestone had felt devastating at the time, but it had also marked the beginning of my complete independence from their validation system. I'd built a career and a life based on my own values and priorities, surrounded by people who appreciated my work and supported my goals. The recognition I received now came from sources that actually mattered in my field: fellow researchers, medical professionals, and patients whose lives were improved by the technology I'd developed. My parents had missed my graduation, but they'd also missed watching me become the kind of scientist and researcher I'd always dreamed of being. Their loss was profound, but it was their choice, and it no longer had the power to diminish my achievements or my sense of self-worth. On the evening before my departure for the World Congress, I stood in my apartment looking at my achievement wall one final time before packing for the trip. The display now included documentation of research that was being used in hospitals, saving lives, and advancing medical care in measurable ways. I thought about the 21-year-old version of myself who had sat alone at graduation, disappointed by her family's absence, but determined to build something meaningful anyway. She'd made the right choice in focusing on her work, rather than seeking approval from people who couldn't provide it. The path forward was clear and exciting. More research opportunities, more potential for impact, more chances to contribute, solutions to important medical challenges. I was exactly where I'd always wanted to be, doing exactly the kind of work I'd always hoped to pursue. And I'd gotten here entirely through my own efforts and choices, supported by people who valued what I was building, rather than people who couldn't see its significance. The girl who had learned to celebrate her achievements alone had grown into a woman who no longer needed to celebrate alone because she'd found her tribe. The community of researchers, innovators, and medical professionals who shared her commitment to using knowledge and technology to improve human health. That was the real victory, more meaningful than any family recognition could have been. I'd learned to build success that didn't depend on anyone else's approval, and that foundation would support whatever I chose to create next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.